Thank you so much for doing this interview today. I sincerely appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with the most important question, which is what was cooler, being a Vulcan Council member in Star Trek or a Starfleet admiral in Into Darkness?
Well, it's a draw, and I'll tell you why. The Vulcan Council membership was not only my first foray into Screen Trek, but I got a bubblegum card, which is framed in lucite in my office. Having said that, when Khan attacks the council chamber, when Khan attacks the meeting in Into Darkness, Bruce Greenwood and I are shot a lot and lurch forward. And they offered a stunt performer for me, but I said no. And they gave me knee pads and I got a stunt bump. So technically, for a day, I was a stunt person. So you can see that they're sort of neck and neck when it comes to joy.
That's fantastic. By the way, I'm sure you would have paid to be a stunt performer in a Star Trek.
I would have paid to do anything in a Star Trek, anything. So the fact that I get to do so much in Star Trek things is an extraordinarily impossible gift.
I can only imagine. I want to jump backwards, actually. Your first credited screenplay was The Client with Joel Schumacher.
Yes.
I'm very curious, how did you break in and were able to sort of get that job?
Well, I wrote a spec script, which actually came out. I followed out to Los Angeles from Brooklyn, where I grew up, and where I returned after college. And, as the story goes, I sold my first screenplay, which was this script that became Silent Fall, which you can watch at 4:00 in the morning on HBO at some point, which actually got made after The Client. But, there's a fallacy in that story, which is, yes, I did sell my first screenplay, but that was after 10 years of failed fiction writing. I mean, I am as failed a fiction writer as you will ever meet. I have just the most fantastic rejection notes from every magazine that you'd ever want not to be rejected by. I wanted to be a writer my entire life, or at least much of my sentient life. And I just sucked. I just couldn't get out of I could get into a short story. I could never get out. And I had the best fiction teachers you can imagine. I mean, I had E.L. Doctorow and Margaret Atwood, Russell Banks. I mean, if anybody was going to teach somebody how to write, it would have been those folks. And I just couldn't quite crack fiction. And so I took the Robert McKee course, of which I am a big fan, and wrote a screenplay. And that screenplay landed and people read it. And one of the people who read it was Joel Schumacher, who was prepping The Client, and they were looking to have a kind of pretty drastic retake on the script. And it was about 6 weeks before production moved to Memphis. And I met with him and he said, sure, come along, weirdly.
That's the beginning of a little bit of a run with you guys. I know you guys did Batman Forever, A Time to Kill, Batman and Robin. What was that time like?
It was very extraordinary for me. I, was not, I didn't know very much about Hollywood at all. I mean, I'm 57 years old. So when I was a kid in New York, in Brooklyn, I'm not even sure I really realized people made movies until somebody with a Young Frankenstein t-shirt came back from LA. And I was like, right. Oh, I guess that is how it happened. Somebody has to write it. And I had never been to Los Angeles until my 20s. And I had been here only once before I actually came here to live. And I had a one room, I followed that screenplay out, and it was but it took a little while before it sold. So I was getting these meetings, and I had a one room apartment in on Rose Avenue in Venice, where the oven was never turned on. There was a bench out front, which was a napping spot for a lot of local folks. And I spent all my time smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee and eating cans of tuna over the sink for lunch, and writing. So when suddenly it went from that to come to Mississippi, come to Tennessee, Mississippi's time to kill, then it was extraordinary. And Joel was incredibly inclusive. His point of view about writing, which was very atypical at the time, especially in features, was, wardrobe has a department head, and sound has a department head. Why should words? And he would he brought me along, and he was very collaborative with actors, and he would say, Akiva, go into the trailer with Tommy Lee, or go in with Susan, and I was entirely unprepared, but so starstruck, and so thrilled, and terrified, that I learned. I learned so much of what I know today from that run of 4 movies.
At the time, you worked on 2 Batman films, completely different beasts, the superhero genre back in the 90s, compared to the way it is today. What was it like working on those films back then? It was a different time.
It's complicated because, I think, in a funny way, this show that Jeff Johns and I created, Titans, is kind of my apology tour for Batman and Robin, because it was heady and extraordinary, and something. I'm a deep old comic book fan, and so the opportunity to get to them and to play in them was amazing. And as you say, it was a different time. So things didn't last that you really wish had. So for me, people may know this, right? But Batman Forever actually was all about Bruce finding his father's journal, and in it said, Martha and I want to stay home tonight, but Bruce insists on going to see a movie. And so you discover that it was all him. He's been holding the guilt all the way through about being responsible for his parents' death. None of that makes the cut, because we shot it and then we tested it, and audiences were not interested in the psychological component of the drama at that point. Right? That was not what they were coming to comic book movies for. I mean, I wrote after Andy Kevin Walker on this version of Batman versus Superman, with Colin Farrell was cast as Batman, Jude Law was cast as Superman, Wolfgang Pearson was directing. We were in prep, and it was the darkest thing you've ever seen. It was, started with Alfred's funeral, and Bruce had fallen in love, renounced being Batman. The Joker kills his wife, and then you discover that it was all a lie. That just the love itself was constructed by the Joker to break him. So it was this wonderful. It was a time where you would sort of be able to get these stories together in script form, but they couldn't quite land in the world. Either somehow the expectations of the object, whether they be audience or corporate or directorial, or it wasn't landing quite in the way I think we imagined when we would put them together on the page. And that, as for Batman and Robin, that one just confuses me. We didn't mean for it to be bad. I swear nobody was like, this will be bad. We were really thinking it was gonna, here's the irony. There was a reel that was sort of put together halfway through where it actually looked, dark in an interesting way. And then it just is what it is. And, I'm sorry. I think we're all sorry.
By the way, just to interject, I've spoken to a lot of people, and I've learned a lot about the craft of filmmaking since with my time at Collider. And it's true, though, nobody sets out to make something bad. Nope. Everyone is putting their heart and soul into this. It's a year or two of your life.
Yeah.
You're trying your hardest, and sometimes, you know, it just doesn't come together. And sometimes, from what I understand, like an okay script becomes this great movie
Yeah.
because of the alchemy.
Yeah, it is alchemy. I always used to say it's like painting by lightning. You know, it's like a mural that you're painting, and you're just every time the lightning flashes, you paint, and then the sun rises, and you're like, or you're like, oh God, what? You know, it is. It's magic. That's the obviously, if it were predictable, if it were manageable in any real way, then we'd only make good movies, right? In the same way that we don't, you know, like the same car is a good car. You know, like you don't typically have a lot of bad cars. You have a lot of movies that don't work, and that is the terror and the joy of it, because you don't work any less hard on the ones that don't land. You know,
I really, what year was that movie you were saying, the Batman Superman thing that you were working on? I don't remember what year that was.
it's like 2001. There was a day. It was right after A Beautiful Mind. I know this because both Ron Howard and I were discussing projects that we had right after the Academy Awards that didn't go forward, and we were both like, well, we can't take it personally today. Like today, you're just going to realize it doesn't matter where you are in your career. It's going to slip through your fingers sometimes. So it was probably 2001, 2002, somewhere there.
Because what I really think that Warner Brothers, DC have done great recently is the idea of these one-shot movies. You know, what Todd Phillips did with Joker. And I really hope they pursue this, where you can tell these one-shot films. And, you know, it sounds to me like the film you were working on was just about, you know, maybe 18 to 20 years too soon in terms of the
It was really world's finest, you know, in a kind of dark and interesting way, and I think could have been lovely. And you know, on the other hand, none of me is sad that Nick Cage's Superman didn't get made. So I guess in that whole period of time, there were wins to be had and losses to be avoided. You know,
completely. You obviously, Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson are working on Batman now. What's your, looking at it from afar, what's your take on the two of them paired up?
Oh, look, Matt Reeves is, I think, so insanely talented. And I think Robert Pattinson is terrific. But for me, the key to this is Matt. Like, have you ever seen the pilot of Felicity?
Yes.
I mean, Matt directed it, JJ wrote it. It hums in this extraordinary way. And from then, I have admired Matt as a director. I just think he's literate, he's articulate emotionally, he's cinematically can be virtuosic. Like, for me, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, we're on the same page. I think Matt is ridiculously talented. So you worked on Practical Magic. There's been a lot of talk about HBO Max doing like a reboot or a reimagining. I'm not exactly what the right term is. When did you hear about that, and what are your thoughts on HBO Max taking a crack at it?
God bless them. You know, Practical Magic is. I have a 9-year-old and a 9-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter. And Practical Magic is, I think, literally the only thing I've written that they can watch. And even then, they have to fast forward through the scary Nicole parts. It's funny. I love Practical Magic. Practical Magic for me is also a movie where there was a different version, which it's sort of weirdly in the same context that we're discussing, sort of how the world has become more interested in this range of dark and light in the same narrative object, which I think is more recent. You know, or that you can have significance and depth and loss in fantasy or science fiction in ways that are more nuanced. So there was a cut of Practical Magic before reshoots that Griffin put together, which was stunningly beautiful. It was more 50-50 between Sandy and Nicole. And this haunting of Nicole was the counterpoint to this sort of emergence of Sandy. It was more of a ghost story. It was really beautiful. It was weird. You know, Griffin Dunn as a director is wonderful because you can't quite locate the object in genre. And there was a version of that which at one point years later I tried to find because I had it on videotape. I was calling Griffin and we were talking about it. It got caught up in a sort of marketing thing at Warner Brothers and moved forward. So in a way that I think didn't serve it ultimately. I fundamentally believe that if HBO Max takes it now and are able to kind of play into the darkness a little more, as well as the joy, I think that will be great.
I find it so interesting talking to people about films when, you know, you have this completely different version. And it's, for me, with the advent of home video and with HBO Max, you would think that, you know, something that they could put on HBO Max would be the alternate cut of Practical Magic. That's like a great thing that fans would want to tune in for.
Right. And here's why they don't, at least up until now, is because those cuts are almost never finished. You know what? So typically what happens is you screen these things where the visual effects are still temp. You know, you're testing them while they're temp. The score is not fit. So that, like, for me, the one great version of this in my career is I Am Legend, where the version that we wrote, the version that we made originally is what's called the alternative cut, right? But that's this weird treat where I can literally go, no, that's the one we meant to make. That's the one we made later. And you can, you know what I mean? And you can, but almost every movie has that. Right? Or a lot of them do. You know, we hear about the Snyder Cut a lot. Like that's so often the case, is that you sort of run down a path and then you manage it towards the end, and sometimes for exactly the right reasons, and sometimes for exactly the wrong reasons, right? The right reasons being creative perseverance, and the wrong reasons being fear. And how that broth informs the end of a movie, you know, is significant. And yes, I think it would be amazing, you know, and somewhere in the archives are all the versions you're talking about. Somebody would have to commit to going back and having it be a project of finishing them. But I think people would actually love them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always curious about alt versions like that. I got to jump into the next thing because I have, you know, limited time with you. I am a huge fan of Fringe. I've watched every episode. I loved that show. Is it too soon to talk about, you know, a revival or a reboot or anything with Fringe?
You know, it's interesting. We talked about it. Jeff Pinkner, JJ, and I talked about it at one point. For me, the heart of Fringe is a guy named Jeff Pinkner. He wrote, most recently, you know, he co-wrote the last two Jumanji movies, but he's just a wonderful writer and a wonderful man and a wonderful showrunner. And we talked to Warner Brothers about it. We talked to ourselves about it. Ultimately, we sort of didn't find a way through, or so it's not too soon. Is it too late? I don't know. It's not in the offing right now.
For the people that have never seen Fringe, great show, worth your time. I mean, I was just a huge fan of it. You know, I love the alt world and what you guys were able to pull off with, you know, a budget.
Thank you. It's funny, it's trending now on, like, you know, the way your Apple TV tells you what people are watching. Somehow there was like this weird Fringe resurgence, which then became this funny little text chain between all of us going, Fringe is trending? Yeah.
Why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
You know?
It was a delight to do.
You got to work with Bay on Transformers. I think you headed a writer's room with Transformers. What was that experience like? I've seen Michael work up close. He's interesting, energized. I'm just curious if you could share what that process was like, and are you involved in any of the Transformers stuff that's going on right now?
I am not involved in the Transformers stuff except for things that may have had their genesis in the room, in which case that was my involvement. And Michael and I did not overlap. So the interesting thing about the room We overlapped for a half an inch on the Venn diagram. The thing about the room was Michael was making his Benghazi movie, and we were building the room, and then Michael came back. We delivered to him the spoils of the room, and then he. So I don't know. I've never been on set with him. I went to college with him, but didn't know him then.
Sure. I would imagine in that room, you guys must have come up with a million ideas. Is there one that you really hope gets to go? Or
yeah, look. You'd have to ask. I don't have anything to do with them, honestly. Lorenzo, my old friend Lorenzo de Bonventura, who I know from Warner Brothers, he produces them, and so there. Geneva Robinson Dort did one that was wonderful. By the way, I loved Christina's, and that became Bumblebee. But there was this wonderful, wonderful sort of in the DMZ after, and sort of this really, you see a little bit of a hint of this at the front of the last one Michael did, but it was kids living in, sort of the wreckage. Chicago had been quarantined. Interesting. Chicago had been cordoned off and quarantined, and therein there was the wreckage of Transformers, and there were also kids living there and families, and it was sort of this discovery that a human being could take the place of the Allspark, with a piece of the Allspark that keeps a Transformer going. So it was sort of a little bit of this merging of humans and Transformers. It was a small movie, but I thought really beautiful.
But I got to jump into Titans, another show that I'm a big fan of, seen all the episodes. Where are you guys at in terms of, did you start filming season 3 before everything got shut down? Or?
No. Writer's Room. Greg Walker is running the Writer's Room in season 3. And he, everything is on, stories have been developed, but everything is a little bit slowed down, obviously. But nope, season 3, is planning to go in front of the cameras as soon as possible.
Got it. Do you know how many episodes it's going to be?
13.
Season 2 introduced Batman and had a blast with it. Is there talk of having Batman come back or any other DC characters join the show?
I am not going to tell you that, only because I think it will
I can't help myself for at least digging a little.
No, absolutely.
Well, is there anything that you can tease for season 3 for fans of the series? Got it? Just that it will be filming at some point when things get back.
Yes, and we're excited by it.
I will leave it there. So I'm going to jump into some Star Trek talk because I fucking love Star Trek. So Star Trek: The Next Generation, probably my all-time favorite show. I love it. I definitely want to know how much you paid to work on Picard.
So I have Polaroids of Alex Kurtzman, and I sold them back to him. So I am like you in that, although older. So my favorite show is TOS, and so my first Star Trek convention was 1976. I was 14 years old. And my mother somehow let me, Billy Weinreb, Lee Grettenstein, and Kit Gunning, and Paul Bennett get a hotel room at the Statler Hilton. Crazy, and we had a lot of pot. That was when pot had seeds and stems. You rolled it on a record album to get the seeds and stems out. And there was this thing that we had. I had been watching. It used to be on WPX Channel 11, 7:00 every night. First run syndication. I don't quite remember the show itself in first run. I probably saw one episode with my father. So for me, it came in first run syndication. And even then, the episodes were being somewhat reduced for commercials. And, what passed for televisions, for color televisions at that point, had nothing to do with the color that we see today. So you went to a Star Trek convention, you could suddenly see these the real blues and the phaser cannon that's cut out in the Rockwall scenes for next week. It was as if God had landed and delivered unto you the opportunity to be amidst all that was extraordinary. And in those days, the community was smaller. So I remember Isaac Asimov was there, David Gerrold was there, Harlan Ellison was there, and you'd sort of, and everybody would speak. And I still have the brochure. It's hand typed. Some fucker mimeographed it. God bless. And so, you talked about Fringe. Some years later, after I had talked to my friend JJ, I introduced him to his wife, and this allows me endless opportunities to get favors back. So after I had talked him into putting me in a couple of Star Trek movies, somewhere in there, I had said, look, I would like to try to direct something. I had just directed an episode of Kings. I would like to try to direct an episode of Fringe. I had just started. Your show Fringe seems fun to me, said I. And he said, well, you have to write it. And I said, well, I don't want to write it. I just want to direct it. He said, tough, you have to write it. So I tried to write a Fringe episode, which I did. Jeff Pinkner sent me back to outline 11 times because it turns out writing a TV episode is hard, and I didn't know how. And so then I wrote and directed this episode, the sort of middle of first season, called Bad Dreams, I think, and I never left. I was drunk uncle on that show for years, and I couldn't have been more delighted. And so somewhere a couple of years ago, Alex Kurtzman, right, who's one of the co-creators of Fringe, finds himself, he's off shooting a movie. There's some sort of turmoil on Star Trek, and he's like, could you go just sort of help hold it together and get it launching? And it's the same thing. I've never left. I mean, they let me in, and now they just can't get rid of me. I live for it. It's my favorite thing. It's so counterproductive because I should be doing all sorts of other things, and all I want to do is Star Trek all the time.
I understand completely. If I was given keys to the Ferrari, I would also say I'm not giving them back. I get it. So I'm very curious. I know Picard got a season 2, and you guys were you close to shooting? Were you shooting?
We were not shooting. We were to start shooting in June, which I guarantee you we will not, unless the world opens tomorrow. We had broken the season. We are about halfway through the writing of it. We will start as soon as we can once the world opens. We will, prep will have to resume, and then we'll start. So, we know it is, and it's cool, and we're excited by it. And, I feel like we learned a lot from season 1, and and of the things that I have in my life, it is the one that is most imminent when the world reopens, right? It's the one that feels like that's the thing that's going to, at least in my life, come back fastest, he says.
So I had heard, and maybe you can correct this, but I had heard Picard was always envisioned as a 3-season show. Any truth to that?
I think that we have discussed it as both a 3-season show, a 5-season show, a let's just keep going forever show. I think that probably that 3-season thing, my guess is, and I do not know this to be a fact, that there are probably 2 seasonal option pickups in the deal. You know what I mean? So, but we certainly, Star Trek Picard, in my view, will go as long as Patrick Stewart wants to do it.
Yeah, that's the thing I was going to say is that, he is not a young man anymore. I love him to death, but how long does he want to play the role?
Yeah, look, and that's really the question, right? As I'm sure you know, he was not interested in coming back. And we, did a lot of eye-back and a lot of really good collaborative story breaking and talking, and and I think he's particularly delighted in a good way now about having come back. And we will rely on that goodwill until he feels he's done.
You mentioned you're halfway through breaking season 2. There is an advantageous thing the only good thing that happens with this pandemic for Picard is you're getting more time with the scripts. And also it's possible that you could finish the whole season. So when you do in the writer's room, so when you do go set out to film, you can block film what you need in certain locations for all the episodes, or is that not possible?
So yes to the first part, no to the second. So to the first part, it is fundamentally a gift to be able to do all of them if you can, right? Because unlike previous iterations of television, this serialized 10-hour narrative has setups and payoffs that, require a kind of thoughtful view of the object once it's completed. It's very funny. In the first season of Picard, there were all these reviews of the beginning. Oh, it's so dark, it's so dark, it's so dark. And I kept saying, they're reviewing the first act of a movie. Like, the first act of a movie is always dark. If you stopped It's a Wonderful Life at the bridge, it's a really dark movie. Like, because fundamentally in a long form narrative, if it's a redemption story, if it's a healing story, it has to be bad at the beginning so it gets good at the end. Like, otherwise there's nothing to fix. So, we are in this weird world now where we create one narrative object, but we dole it out bit by bit, which is fascinating, and can be kind of fun. But what you really want is to be able to refine yourselves once you've written your paper. So if in fact you could have, the time to write 10 hours first, that would be amazing. And maybe we will. In terms of shooting, we do block shoot. We block shoot in episodes of 2. But the way it works with the Directors Guild is you can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, unless we had one director doing the whole thing, then you actually I can't shoot something for Jonathan Frakes episode.
You wrap season 1, come out. Have you all of a sudden gotten a lot more phone calls from people saying they would really love to helm an episode in season 2?
Well, that I haven't. I mean, that would be Secret Hideout more, and but the truth is we have it's a little, there are only 5 directors per season, right? Because it's 2 episode blocks. So, anybody who pretty much wants to come back from season 1 is coming back. That might leave a slot open.
My last thing for you about Picard, but I could keep on going. You obviously, Jonathan Frakes, you had some, key characters in the first season. Are any of those characters? Can you tease any of the original, of who might be visiting in season 2?
No. I mean, I want to, but no.
Right. I get it. Listen, I have to.
I respect you.
Yeah, and by the way, I have so many questions. So someone on Twitter, and I want to include a Twitter question, said, what kind of ship was the La Sienna? It was unlike any other ship we'd seen on Trek.
The La Serena was...
Serena. I'm bad at English.
Okay. What is it? It's a modified cargo ship. It's non-Federation. And that's all. We made it up.
Wait, things are made up in Star Trek?
Oh, when I say made up, we got that telescope that looks in the future, and we found it.
Right, of course. Since I'm running out of time, I'm going to go through a bunch of questions. A lot of us have been wondering about Lower Decks. What's the status of that?
I have nothing to do with Lower Decks except desperate to watch it. Like, literally couldn't seem funnier to me. Have you seen any of it? No. There was a test reel going around the office, and I didn't see it, and that sucks. But I've seen the still frames, and the pitches for it are fun. Like, literally the pitch for it is the funniest thing you've ever heard. Second Contact, I mean, it's the greatest thing ever. We're all ready to watch. Yeah, we just want to see it. Me too. I think Mike McMahon is actually a genius. Are there any updates on this Pike series? Are you just nodding your head because you can't say or you won't say? All those things. Can't say, won't say, ain't saying, don't know, wish I don't know, could know. What about the Section 31 series? I don't know. I honestly, I don't. I know that there were or are scripts being developed for Section 31. I don't. I mean, I don't. So you're not involved in that one. Got it. I love the way you ended Star Trek Discovery Season 2. It opens up this huge new possibility for Season 3. What can you tease people about the 3rd season? I can't. I'm not on. I'm not on Discovery now. I just know things
So
about
just Picard.
today.
Got it. Well, look, for you, obviously you watch Discovery. I'm just curious about the ending of season 2. And
No, and look, we all helped build that idea, even all the way back to season 1. Aaron Harberts and Gretchen Berg, the original showrunners and the showrunners of season 1, like that idea dates all the way back to that. I think it's a spectacular idea, which is to to go post the timeline we know. I think Alex Kurtzman. So Alex has really been deeply involved in the building out of what season 3 looks like, and what that post-Federation future is. I've seen some of it. I mean, because we all work together in the same, we did, place with lots of pictures of Star Trek on the wall and editing bays and things. And it seems awesome to me. I mean, I think it is. It's not a final frontier, but it's a new one.
I'm very excited for Without Remorse.
Right.
Where is that film in the post-production process?
We are in complex coronaed post. So the director is in Italy. The editor is in Germany. We are here in various places, and we Skype together, and we work on the movie together, and then we see cuts, and so we are in the editorial phase, and we're actually doing. We actually did it all week. We've been doing it all week this week in the mornings, for time zones, and it's going really far better than it should, considering where we all are. I mean, Michael B. Jordan is so extraordinary, and the object is very singular in that way. It's kind of a delivery system for this performance. I like it. I think you'll like it.
Listen, the thing that's fascinating about that movie is that it's been in development since Cecil B. DeMille's time on the planet.
Just before, actually, it starred Heston at first. No, but it really almost has, right? Because the Sean Ryan draft exists, like, and it's, was wonderful. Like, this goes way. I mean, I have admired that project for the better part of a decade in screenplay form.
Yeah, no, it's been in development since like 19 forever. I mean,
yeah.
All kidding aside, it's been a long time.
No, it has. Look, this is a thing. I'm a big fan of this, which is, I'm much less interested in the fresh new thing, because the fresh new thing is often just yesterday's news quickly. I like the things that have hung around but haven't found their way, because typically they abide with durability because there's something there. So for me, I Am Legend was set on a shelf for 10 years. Hancock, which was Tonight He Comes, was around for 10 years. Even Deep Blue Sea, these are things that I value, these objects that people have affection for but haven't quite been able to crack. And so too is Without Remorse. There's merit in these things that we don't forget.
Yeah, well, if it's sticking around like that, generally there's something to it. So what's the status of the map of tiny perfect things?
I think we might have arguably been the very last movie to shoot in America. Because that Monday when everything else was wrapping up, that Saturday we still shot that following Monday. So we're done. And
you got your last day of principal.
Our last day of photography, and it is the director is in his director's cut right now.
For people that aren't familiar with it, can you tease what it's about?
Well, yeah, it's written by Lev Grossman, who's a wonderful writer who actually created the novels that The Magicians is based on, and it is about these two young people who essentially are, at least at the beginning seeming to live in a version of Groundhog Day. They're trapped in a small town, and that in a day that keeps repeating. And it's really lovely.
I know you got to go, but I'm going to hit 3 quick things.
Take 6 more minutes. Go.
Oh, so whatever happened with Ringworld?
I'm working on it.
Well, right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, literally right now. Like, literally the phone call that I got off of was I was having a conversation about some notes.
Got it. So what can you tease people about the status of the project?
Well, we are, MGM and Amazon are developing it, and I am writing the pilot currently. Alan Taylor is attached to direct, and and hopefully that will turn into a actual set of moving pictures, but God knows.
Well, the thing that with Amazon is that I know that they've put more emphasis on things that will possibly break out. Like with The Boys, that completely broke out. Carnival Row, they have Lord of the Rings, so can you sort of talk about how they're looking for things that will be possible world builders?
I have no idea. I mean, honestly, I don't know what Amazon is looking for. I do know that they seem to like these larger objects, right, that have scope and scale. I mean, if you go all the way back to that initial play with Man in the High Castle, that is one of these sort of, it's a point of view piece. And I think that these big comprehensive universes, I think there are very few of them still available. I certainly think Known Space is one that, for those of us who are Larry Niven fans in our high school days, or in your case, it could be college because I'm 700 years older than you, but
not really, but go on.
But Known Space is sort of, Niven's world, his universe, dare I say, is so incredibly complex and nuanced. And Ringworld has always been this entry point, and everybody has better minds than mine have tried to crack it. But hopefully we'll do it this time.
Well, there's also a difference nowadays because Amazon, Netflix, the streaming services have allowed us, or not like I'm involved, have allowed you guys and creatives to tell these very ambitious stories over 8 and 10 episodes that could never be done in a 2-hour movie.
I think that's really true. I think that, it's funny, people are constantly these days looking for IP. The best IP is to look at all the novels that you couldn't make as a 2-hour movie. Because that's what we always used to do, is we take the book and try to squish it. And, those days are gone. Like, now you can just really figure out how to translate it. And 8 and 10 hours is such an extraordinary opportunity for storytelling.
Listen, I don't know about you. I love movies. I grew up on movies. They're my soul. But I have found more and more that I'm spending more time watching TV series than I am with movies because I'm getting something more out of it.
I literally can't take my eyes off of Debs. That level of engagement and the pace of storytelling, you can't do that in movies. Movies now, and by the way, I too love movies and will always love movies and, cherish the opportunity to get to work on them. And they are for things that end. Movies want to end and television wants to go. And just the difference between the compressed finite experience and the longer, more patient experience is they're different kinds of storytelling. And it's great to live in a time where both are thriving.
I think one of the big problems with movies is that because if you're a movie fan, if you've watched thousands of movies, there are only so many trajectories of every character that can happen. And I think that a lot of us, what we're running into is you see a character at the beginning and you're like, okay, that person's bad, or that person's going to do that twist. One of the reasons I think Endgame is so magnificent is the 3-hour running time allowed so many different things to happen that the audience didn't expect because of that extra hour of screen time.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think that, what we started to see, if you go sort of back to True Detective, where things weren't following the traditional paths that we were used to in cinema. Suddenly television was doing that thing that movies can't, which is stretch, turn, stretch, turn. Now it becomes easier to go to TV for the non-conventional character choices. Because unless you are the Russos and Kevin Feige, it's hard to do a 3 hour plus object.
I have to ask you though, so what happened with Angeline?
Evangeline, we kept trying to develop it and we failed.
That's an honest answer. Okay, and then my last thing for now is the $1 Billion Spy. Whatever happened with that?
$1 Billion Spy. We're putting it. We were putting it together for funding. It was going to go to Cannes, but there isn't. So I think it still exists as a prospect. It is a movie that you would take your cast and your director to film festivals. Because again, it's one of these more interesting objects, but not. It's not a big movie. So it's the kind of thing that you build, and the opportunities for building movies that way in terms of financing are very limited right now. Hopefully when the world comes back, we can find some folks who want to pay for it.
I always like asking this question, and with you, because you're involved in about 1,000 things, I'm going to ask it for you. What else are you working on that you can tease, if anything, that will not get you in trouble?
What am I working on that I can tease?
If anything.
I'm very hesitant to tease because I find that, half the things you do are lovely and half the things you do are terrible, but a full half of all of those things, if not 2/3, never get made. So the truth is, today, my heart and life is mostly in the things I'm doing, and I'm excited about Major Matt Mason, which I think got touched on. With we're doing it Paramount with Tom Hanks, and Michael Chabon wrote a short story that I'm adapting into a screenplay. So
yeah, that Michael character, he's okay.
You know what? He's got a thing with them words.
Right. When the truth is, when I heard that he was involved with Picard, that was my thing. Well, I'm like, okay, well, fuck, this is not what I expected. Sorry for the language.
That's okay. Yes, he's Michael and I've known him for 40 years. I went to college with his wife. He is an old dear friend, and I get the honor of having dragged him into this Star Trek thing. There was no dragging, and boy, he is some talented storyteller and fun to work with. We're doing Cavalier and Clay, all of us. So that's exciting.
That was I know I'm out of time, but I have to ask. That's when I love that book. Just love, and I think that book could never be a movie. I don't. If you're making it as a movie, forget it. I don't know how it works. Right. But as a series, I think that could be amazing.
Right. And Michael and his wife Ayala Waldman, together, they're writing the whole thing, and it is not a movie. We, the two of them, and Alex Kurtzman and I, who are producing it with them, have sat around and got to do that thing that you want to do with one of your favorite novels, with the author in the room, which is go, well, what if you did that? And it's super fun.
How close is that to getting a green light? And do you envision it as like a 6, 8, 10 episode limited series, or something that could continue?
I am not going to. I have no idea how green lights work in television. I know that Michael and Ayala are writing, so the number of it. And when I say that, I mean that depending on different deal structures, 2 scripts can trigger it, 10 scripts can trigger, no scripts can trigger, an actor can trigger it. So I don't know what the construct of that is, simply because right now they're writing and that comes first. I do know how long it is, and again, I'm not going to tell you, only because I feel like it's not actually mine to share, like it's theirs to share. But I think that they are going to give it the breadth it deserves.
Completely. I know you have to go, so I'm going to say I'll stop, but I'm not joking when I say that I really wanted to dig into Constantine and I Am Legend and Hancock, and I had a shit ton of other questions that I just had to skip over because of time. So hopefully at some point in the not so distant future, we can do a part 2 and dig into these other subjects because you didn't hate this so much.
I would be happy to. I do. Those are movies I do. I'd be thrilled to talk about because there's some fun stuff about them and some interesting stuff about them.